So today we are going to do some Algebra 1 review. We're going to learn how to multiply and factor polynomials. Today is going to be the easy trinomials and the difference of two squares. Tomorrow it'll be the little bit more challenging trinomials that you'll have to factor. Now before we actually get into the factoring, we need to review how to multiply polynomials. And we've really been doing that this year already. Whenever you multiply two polynomials, you always multiply coefficients. However, when you multiply variables, you would take, and if the variables have exponents, you add the exponents if the bases are the same. So for example, if you multiply an x squared times an x to the third, all you do is keep the x the same and add the powers. Whenever you multiply two binomials, you either can apply distributive property, or if your Algebra 1 teacher taught you the acronym FOIL, this is where you're just making sure that you cover all the pairs of multiplication you need to cover. After you FOIL or distribute, you always should combine any like terms. So let's try the first two examples. What we're going to do is multiply a monomial times a trinomial. Again, you don't need to know any of these vocabulary terms. You just need to know how to multiply and factor. So for this one, all I'm doing is distributive property. I need to distribute the x to the 3x squared. Once I do that, I get 3x to the third, because remember this x has an assumed power of 1, and you would add it to the x squared. Then I need to distribute it to the x, and that's a negative 1x. So this becomes a negative x squared. And then finally, you'll distribute it to the 1, and that just becomes a positive x. And you're done. There are no like terms here, so this is my multiplication of this monomial times the trinomial. Next one is a monomial times a binomial. Again, all we're doing is distributive property. So negative 3x times positive 5x. Negative 3 times positive 5 is negative 15. And then add the powers on the x's. And then distribute the negative 3x to the 2. And I get negative 6x. No like terms here to combine, so I'm finished. So next, we're going to be multiplying binomials. Now, you don't need to use the acronym FOIL. You can actually just use distributive property. But the letters in the word FOIL tell you which terms to multiply. So for the F, it's the first terms. The O stands for the outer or the outside terms. The I stands for inner or inside terms. And then the L in the word FOIL is the last. So let's go ahead and take a look. So if I use my acronym FOIL, I'm multiplying the first. So that would be x times x, and I get x squared. Then, so that would be the F. The O in the acronym FOIL or the word FOIL, those are the two outer terms. That would give me a positive 4x. And then when I do the two inside terms, negative 8 times x is negative 8x. And then finally last will be the negative 8 times the 4, and that'll give me negative 32. You'll always be able to combine the two middle, the inner and the outer, and this gives you x squared minus 4x minus 32. Just take your time, watch your signs. You don't have to use the acronym FOIL. You can also just use distributive property. So another way to do it is you would think I got to distribute the 3x to the 5x. That gives me 15x squared. Then I have to distribute the 3x to the 7, which gives me 21x. But essentially, we're using that acronym, F, O. And then now we go to the negative 2 term, and we would distribute that. And we get negative 10x, which is really our inside, and then also distribute the negative 2 to the 7, which is essentially our last, and we get negative 14. Add the two middle ones, 15x squared plus 11x minus 14, because 21 minus 10 is 11. Let's try number 5. Same thing. Multiply the first, 2x squared. Multiply the outer term, 2x times positive 5 is 10x. Multiply the inside, negative 4 times x is negative 4x. And then finally, the last, negative 4 times 5, and I get negative 20. So this is last, this is the inside, this was the outside, and this was the first. And then that's how you can make sure that you've covered everything. Add the two middles, 10x minus 4x gives me 6x, and then just rewrite the 2x and the minus 20. So just be careful, take your time, watch your signs. Let's try number 6. Again, same thing. 7x times 4x is 28x squared. And then 7x times negative 3 is negative 21x. And then the inside, negative 2 times positive 4, negative 8x. And then finally last, negative 2 times negative 3, positive 6. Again, add the middles. Negative 21x minus 8x is negative 29x. Nothing to add to the x squared, so just rewrite the 28x squared, and then the plus 6. And we've now multiplied those binomials. Next, we're going to talk about some special products. So for the first one, notice that the letters here, the A and the A are the same, and then the B and the B are the same. What's different is one has an addition, one has a subtraction. Once you FOIL this, it ends up turning into just A squared minus B squared. This is actually called the difference, this answer, the difference of two squares. When I used to teach this to my Algebra 1 class, I would tell them to memorize the perfect squares up to 20, so that way when they get a problem and they have to factor it, if they can recognize that some of the numbers in it are perfect squares, it makes factoring so much easier. Now the next two, notice these are both have the binomial squared. So when you take a binomial and you square it, the answer becomes a perfect square trinomial. Now again, I'm not going to test you on any of this vocabulary. Just understand that these are terms that you should have seen before, and you can either choose to memorize the pattern or just take the binomials and FOIL it or distribute it. It really doesn't matter. So let me go ahead. I'm going to do an example of the difference of two squares, taking the two binomials that have the same numbers, but one's a plus sign, one's a minus sign. So let me go ahead and do number 7 on the next slide. A binomial squared, you're just going to square it. So actually, when you have a binomial that's raised to the second power, you're just going to square it. And then the answer becomes a perfect square trinomial. So for example, on this one that's here, the A plus B squared, really all you need to do is take it, write it twice, and then FOIL it. And once you do that, it gives you the pattern that's listed here. Now, let me just show you an example of a mistake that I see every year when we start out the school year with my Algebra 2 honors class. So for example, let's say I gave you the question x plus 3 squared. The common mistake is students think they can take this power 2, square the x, square the 3, and when they do that, they got it wrong. So what you need to do is you need to take this x plus 3 squared. You're going to square it, which means write down x plus 3 2 times. And now we distribute or FOIL. And then we would get x times x is x squared. X times 3, 3x. Then the inside gives me 3x. And then finally last gives me 3 times 3 is 9. So then I end up with x squared plus 6x plus 9. By doing this, see how you miss out on the middle term, and that's why it's wrong. So again, the pattern for this is a plus b squared, and remember what it turns into is the a squared. Then what happens in the middle is this times 2. So that's where you get the 2ab. And then the last term is just the b squared. And if you look at it, that's what happened there. My advice to you is you're better off not memorizing the pattern. Just write the binomial twice and FOIL it. It's the best thing to do. I see too many times students try to memorize the pattern and then they get confused. So let's try some examples. So for the first one, I'm going to FOIL it. So first, 2x times 2x is 4x squared. Then I'm going to do 2x times negative 3, negative 6x. Then do 3 times 2x, positive 6x. And then finally, the last term, which is positive 3 times negative 3, gives me negative 9. Notice this one, the middle terms canceled out. They'll cancel out here. So this goes away. And then you're left with the difference of two squares, the 4x squared minus 9. So when the numbers are exactly the same in the binomials, but one's a plus sign, one's a minus sign, always what results is the difference of two squares. Same thing's going to happen on the next one. If I do first, I get 16a squared. The outside gives me negative 20ab. Now, whenever I multiply two variables like this, notice the next one. Instead of putting this in as BA, I always put it, when I have two variables, I put it alphabetically. That helps me to recognize like terms a little easier. And then finally, the last will be negative 25b squared. So notice by putting this in as AB on both, it's easy to see that negative 20AB plus 20AB cancels this. And then now my final answer is the difference of two squares, 16a squared minus 25b squared. The next one is my binomial squared. So again, don't just try to square the 6x and square the 5. You will get it wrong. You need to take it, write it down 2 times, and now FOIL it. So 6x times 6x, 36x squared. 6x times negative 5, negative 30x. Negative 5x, negative 5 times 6x is also negative 30x. And then finally last, negative 5 times negative 5, positive 25. Notice this time, all right, so notice this time my outer and inner do not cancel. I actually have to combine them And once I add negative 30x minus 30x, it's negative 60x. And then just drop down the 36x squared and then the plus 25. And that is the result of a binomial squared. Let's try another one. Still a binomial squared. Again, write it twice and FOIL it. So here, 5 minus 8x, 5 minus 8x. Again, we're going to FOIL. We get 25. Outer, negative 40x. Inside, negative 40x. And then finally, last, negative 8x times negative 8x is positive 64x squared. Remember your rules for integers. Now I can combine my middle terms. The 25 stays. The negative 40x minus 40x is negative 80x. And then drop down the plus 64x squared. Nothing combines with it. Number 11. Again, write it twice and FOIL it. So 8x plus 3, 8x plus 3. So now we'll FOIL. 64x squared plus 24x plus 24x plus 9. Combine the middles. It gives you a positive 48x. Nothing to combine with the 64 and nothing to combine with the 9. So that is your review of multiplying binomials and multiplying a monomial times a polynomial. Now we're going to get into what's really going to happen in chapter 10 is the factoring. So the reason why I wanted to show you the multiplying the binomials is when we factor a trinomial or factor the difference of two squares, it's going to turn it into two binomials. And then from there, that's how you're going to get your solutions. We're not going to solve these quadratics until next week. This week is strictly factoring. And in Algebra 2 Honors, we factor all year long, pretty much in every single chapter. So let's go ahead and take a look at our first pattern, or our first example of a trinomial. So when you're factoring, put it in standard form. And that standard form is going to be the x squared term, then the x term, then the constant. Now you may not have an x term because it may be the difference of two squares. The a, b, and c in this problem are just constants. All of the examples I do today, all of my a values are going to be equal to 1. These are going to be the easier trinomials. So what we need to do when it's in this form, we're looking for two factors of this c term that when I add them or find the sum, they will give me the middle term. So in this example here, I'm looking for the factors of the c term, which is 18. So factors of 18, that when I find their sum, it's going to give me 9. So my factors of 18, and I'm going to do a nice organized list. It would be 1 times 18. But when I add those two factors, 1 plus 18, I get 19. I have not found the magic combination yet. I'm going to try the next one, and I try to do it in an organized list. 2 times 9, when I multiply them, give me 18. But when I add them, still don't have a 9 yet. It only gives me an 11. So now I got to try another one. And that would be 3 times 6. That will give me 18 when I multiply. And when I add it, I get the sum I was looking for. So the two factors of 18 that give me a sum of 9 are going to be 3 and 6. So now you'll take those factors and you're going to set up your binomials. This first one will be the factors of the x. So right here I put x times x. And then in this spot, will be the two factors you just found. So the 3 and the 6. Now, the whole purpose of me having you practice multiplying binomials is after you think you found your answer, I highly recommend you multiply it back. After I FOIL this, if it does not go back to that problem, then I've done something wrong. So let's FOIL it and make sure it works. So x times x gives me x squared. X times 6 gives me 6x. 3 times x gives me 3x. And then finally last, 3 times 6 is 18. Add the middles. And we do get back to our original question. So my answer of x plus 3 and x plus 6 is the correct answer. Now, it doesn't matter if you put it in as x plus 6 and then x plus 3. The order that you write the binomials doesn't matter. Now, some of you are going to get really quick. You're going to know your times tables really fast, and you may not have to make that organized list. You might have automatically known that the factors of 18 that give you 9 are 3 times 6, and you wouldn't have had to go through that whole process. Some of the numbers that you're going to list the factors for might be kind of large, and you may need to do that organized list. So this is just an explanation of what I just did. So when that last term, that C term, is positive, then the factors in your binomials, or the numbers that you find, are going to have the same sign. So, and the sign that they're both going to have is going to be the sign of the middle. So when that B term, that middle term, this BX, so when this middle term, so let's say it's ax squared plus bx plus c. So when this is positive and this is positive, then both signs in the binomials are going to be positive. However, if this b term is negative, but the c is positive, so when this is positive and this is negative, then both signs, in order to multiply to get a positive number, both signs need to be negative. So when the last term is positive, the signs in the binomial will be the same, and the sign that they'll both have will be the middle term. Okay, so here's my first example here, and it wants us to factor this. So again, I'm looking for the factors of 36 that will sum to 15. And again, if you're really good and you can recognize it right away, then you don't have to go through this tedious list. Now, again, both of these are positive. So that tells me once I find the factors, my signs are going to be both positive. Now, again, you could also put in, if you want, the x here, and then the number that's going to go here are going to be the factors we find. So let's start listing them. So 1 and 36, that'll multiply to give me a 36, but when I add it, I get 37. That one doesn't work. Let's try 2. 2 and 18, that gives me positive 36, but when I add it, I get 20. Still not 15. Keep going. 3 and 12. I think I found the correct combination, because 3 plus 12 is 15, so those were the factors I was looking for. They're both positive, so x plus 3, x plus 12. And again, if you'd rather write the x plus 12 first and then the x plus 3, it doesn't matter. 36 actually has 4 and 9 and 6 and 6. But notice these will multiply to give me 36. But when I add them, that one gives me 13. That one gives me 12. Those are not the one I was looking for. So the one I was looking for was the 3 times 12. So the next one, again, I'm looking for factors of the 12. So factors of 12 that will sum to 7. So again, if you want to get your binomial set up, x's go here. Notice they're both positive, so it'll be plus plus. And now let's find those numbers. So 1 times 12, but when I add that, I get 13. Not the 7 I'm looking for. 2 and 6. This gives me 12, but when I add it, I get 8. And then finally, 3 times 4, that gives me 12. And when I add 3 and 4, that's the combination I'm looking for. So I'll put in here, plus 3, plus 4. Again, you can FOIL these to double check your answers. When the numbers start getting kind of large, I highly recommend you FOIL it. It will help save your answer, especially if your signs are messed up. Now we're going to do one with the sign in the middle being negative. For the next one, we're looking for factors of positive 15 that when I add them, I get a negative 8. So remember, when this number here is positive and this one's negative, this is a clue that both signs are going to have the sign in the middle. So in my binomials, it's going to be an x minus, and now I got to start looking for the factors. So my factors of 15, and it'll be a negative 1 times a negative 15, because I need to make it equal positive 15. But when I add those, I get negative 16. Not the sum I'm looking for. So let's try. 2 won't work, but 3 will. So negative 3 times negative 5 gives me positive 15. And when I add it, it's the negative 8 I'm looking for. So the factors I put in here are going to be a negative 3 and a negative 5. And again, you can FOIL it and make sure it goes back. So again, you would do first x squared, outside negative 5x, inside negative 3x, and then finally last, which would give you positive 15. Notice when you add the middle, you get the negative 8x that you were looking for. So again, the order that you write the binomial, you could put the minus 5 first and then the minus 3. That order doesn't matter. You will. Let's try the next one. Again, this is positive, this is negative. So remember, when this one is positive, signs are the same, and the sign that both numbers will have is the sign of the middle. So when I'm done, it'll be x minus, x minus. So we're looking for factors of 6 that when I sum them or add them together, I get a negative 5. So they both have to be negative. So negative 1 times negative 6. This gives me positive 6. But when I add them, I get negative 7. That doesn't work. So let's try negative 2 and negative 3. And that'll give me positive 6. And when I add them, I get the negative 5. So those are going to be my 2 factors. So a 2 and a 3. And again, the order that you place them doesn't matter. All right. When C is negative, this tells me that the factors need to have opposite signs to multiply to get a negative. The sign of B will tell you which factor is positive, and it's going to be the bigger number. So the bigger number will have the sign of the middle. So let's try some examples. So notice on this problem, this is negative. My bigger factor is going to have the sign of this middle one. So my bigger factor for this problem is going to be the positive number. So let's list them. So I'm looking for factors of a negative 20 that when I find their sum, it's going to be a 1. So my signs need to be different in order to multiply to get a negative 20. So if I do 1 and 20, my bigger factor between 1 and 20 is the 20. So my smaller number is the negative. So the sign of the middle goes on the bigger factor. This will give me negative 20 when I multiply, but when I add, I get 19. Let's try the next one because that one didn't work. Negative 2 times 10 gives me negative 20 when I multiply, but when I add, I get 8. Still not working. Try the next one. 3 doesn't work, but 4 will. When I multiply that, negative 20, and when I add it, I get 1. So this is the combination I was looking for. So my two factors are going to be x minus 4 and x plus 5. And again, the order that you write them doesn't matter. You can also write it as x plus 5 and x minus 4. Either way. Again, when these signs start switching up like this, it's a good idea to FOIL it, to double check that you are getting the right middle term. Now we're going to do one where they're both negative signs. So notice again, my C term is negative. So because this one is also negative, this tells me my bigger factor out of the two that I find is going to be negative. So again, I'm looking for factors of negative 18 that when I find their sum, it'll give me a negative 3. And my bigger factor is going to be negative. So 1 times negative 18, between 1 and 18, 18 is the bigger number, and it gets the sign of the middle. When I added those, I get negative 17. It's not giving me the sum that I want yet. Let's try 2. 2 times negative 9. I get negative 18, but I only get negative 7. It's not working either. Let's try 3. Oh, this is going to be the one. So 3 plus negative 6 gives me the negative 3. These are going to be the numbers that go into my binomial. So it'll be x plus 3 and x minus 6. Again, the order doesn't matter. You could also write it as x minus 6 and then x plus 3. All right, whenever you have a binomial and it asks you to factor it, remember what this came from is a plus b, a minus b, because remember that turns into the difference of two squares. So the easiest way to do this, if you recognize perfect squares, is square root the x, square root the 9. So in your parentheses, you're going to have the square root of x squared is x, the square root of 9 is 3, 1 gets a plus sign, 1 gets a minus. It doesn't matter if you put the minus first and then the plus second. So they're going to be exactly the same letter and number. 1 gets a plus sign, 1 gets a minus. This only works when both terms here are perfect squares. Let me try the next one. So for this one, same thing. X squared and 64 are perfect squares. So square root the x squared, square root the 64. So let me set up my binomials. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of 64 is 8. 1 gets a plus sign, 1 gets a minus. And again, you could reverse it. It doesn't matter. So that is it for your introduction and review of Algebra 1.